72 hours ago, a tropical disturbance formed in the western Pacific that meteorologists are now calling a once-in-a-generation event. Right now, as you watch this, Super Typhoon Fanphone is maintaining sustained winds of 180 miles per hour with gusts exceeding 220, strong enough to literally peel the roof off a reinforced concrete building in under 30 seconds. And every single forecast model predicting its path was paid for in blood. Not money, not computing power, blood, human lives, thousands of them. To understand why what happens in the next 48 hours could reshape how we think about extreme weather, you first need to understand what we're actually looking at. A Category 5 typhoon isn't just a really bad storm. It's a heat engine the size of France converting thermal energy from warm ocean water into kinetic energy at a rate that would power the entire United States for 6 months. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center clocked Fanphone's pressure drop at 28 millibars in 6 hours, a rate of intensification so rapid that it has its own classification: explosive intensification. For context, Hurricane Katrina, which killed over 1,800 people and caused $125 billion in damage, intensified at roughly half that rate. The system organized on September 18, 2025, roughly 800 miles east of Guam. Sea surface temperatures in that region were registering 31.2 degrees Celsius, about 2.5 degrees above the historical average for this time of year. That doesn't sound like much, but in the thermodynamics of tropical cyclones, those extra degrees are rocket fuel. Within 24 hours, the disturbance had developed a closed circulation. Within 48, it had an eye. By hour 60, satellite imagery showed a perfectly symmetrical structure with a pinhole eye 12 miles across, surrounded by a stadium of thunderstorms reaching 55,000 feet into the atmosphere, taller than commercial aircraft can fly. And then the models started disagreeing. Typhoon forecasting relies on something called ensemble modeling. Multiple computer simulations run the same storm forward in time using slightly different initial conditions and physics. Where most of the models agree, you get your forecast track, the cone of uncertainty you see on weather maps. For Fanphone, the models stopped agreeing on September 20th. The American GFS model curved the storm north toward Taiwan and the southern coast of China. The European ECMWF model bent it west-northwest toward the northern Philippines and potentially Hong Kong. The Japanese JMA model threaded a path between them, and the Navy's COAMPSTC model, which has historically been the most accurate for Western Pacific storms, showed something no one wanted to see: a stall. The storm would slow to a crawl 150 miles east of Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines, and sit there for 36 to 48 hours, dumping catastrophic rainfall while maintaining Category 5 intensity over warm water. Dr. Jennifer Sutherland, a tropical meteorologist at Colorado State University who has spent 20 years studying rapid intensification events, put it bluntly in a briefing to emergency coordinators on September 21st. If the COAMP solution verifies, we're looking at a rainfall event that could exceed 60 inches in elevated terrain. That's not a flood. That's a different category of disaster. 60 inches of rain in 2 days. That's 5 feet of water, falling from the sky. On mountainous terrain where rivers are already swollen from monsoon season. The Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration issued its highest alert level, signal number 5, for 3 provinces on the eastern coast of Luzon. That alert hasn't been used since Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. Haiyan killed 6,300 people. This isn't the first time a stalling super typhoon has threatened the Philippines. On November 7, 2013, Typhoon Haiyan, known locally as Yolanda, made landfall on the island of Leyte with sustained winds of 195 miles per hour. It was the strongest tropical cyclone ever recorded at landfall. When the storm surge into Tacloban City reached 20 feet, entire neighborhoods were swept clean off their foundations. Ships weighing thousands of tons were carried miles inland. A survivor named Liesl Tanyada described watching her neighbors climb onto their roofs as the water rose, then watching the roofs themselves get ripped away. She held her 3-year-old daughter above her head in chest-deep water for 4 hours, wedged between 2 walls of a half-collapsed building. When the water receded, over 10,000 people were missing or confirmed dead in Tacloban alone. The investigation afterward identified over 400 failures in the warning and evacuation system. Communication towers were destroyed before the worst of the storm arrived. Emergency shelters were built in flood zones. Local officials didn't understand what a 20-foot storm surge actually meant. Many thought it meant 20-foot waves, not a 20-foot wall of water that would simply erase everything below that elevation. The Philippine government rebuilt the entire disaster response framework from the ground up after Haiyan. They hardened 1,200 evacuation centers. They installed a dedicated emergency radio network that runs on satellite backup. They trained 50,000 barangay, village-level officials in storm surge visualization using 3D terrain models. Every one of those reforms exists because 6,300 people drowned in a storm they were told was coming but couldn't fully comprehend. And now, 12 years later, the system is about to be tested by something potentially worse. The stall scenario is not confirmed. It is being modeled. The Fanphone's track requires the storm to thread between two high-pressure systems, one anchored over the western Pacific, another building over mainland China. If the gap between those systems closes even slightly, the typhoon loses its steering current and stops moving forward. A stationary Category 5 typhoon over warm water doesn't weaken. It sits and it feeds. If the COAMP solution verifies, emergency managers face a catastrophic decision tree. Do you evacuate 4 million people from low-lying areas based on a model that might be wrong? Or do you wait for more certainty and risk losing the 12-hour window you need to move that many people safely? The question the Philippine government faces right now is whether a model developed by the U.S. Navy for military operations is reliable enough to bet millions of lives on. The answer to that question has to be made in the next 6 hours. Pagasa Administrator Dr. Vicente Milano was careful in his 2 p.m. press conference on September 22nd. He said, "We are monitoring multiple scenarios. The public should prepare for the worst case, but we are not ordering mandatory evacuations outside signal number 5 areas at this time." That's the language of a man trying not to cause a panic while privately knowing that the worst case scenario has a 40% probability and would be unsurvivable for anyone who stays. The time window between now and landfall is roughly 18 hours. Moving 4 million people out of a flood zone requires at least 12. The math is getting tight. Right now, imagine you're standing in the operations center of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council in Quezon City. The room is fluorescent lit and overcrowded. 30 people are staring at a 12-foot projection screen showing the latest satellite loop. The eye of Fanphone is a perfect circle, so clearly defined you can see the shadow it casts on the ocean surface below from the ring of towering thunderstorms around it. The winds at flight level, the altitude where Hurricane Hunter aircraft measure the storm, are 195 miles per hour. Sustained. That's stronger than an EF4 tornado. Except this tornado is 400 miles wide and has been spinning at that intensity for 18 hours straight. Through the data feeds streaming in from NOAA's reconnaissance flights, you see the pressure readings, 892 millibars. For reference, standard sea level pressure is 1,013 millibars. Anything below 900 millibars in a tropical cyclone is considered extreme. Haiyan bottomed out at 895. Eta Fanphone is stronger. The rainfall rate estimates from the GOES West satellite are showing convective cells dumping 4 inches per hour in a rotating band 60 miles wide. That band is currently over open ocean. In 12 hours, if the track holds, it will be over the Sierra Madre mountain range on Luzon's eastern coast, a region where rivers drain into narrow valleys that funnel floodwater into coastal towns in a matter of hours. There's no dam system in those mountains. There's no way to control where that water goes. For the next 18 hours, what happens depends on atmospheric physics no human can control. A ridge of high pressure, 1,500 miles away, strengthens or weakens by 2 millibars. That's the difference between the storm curving north toward Taiwan or stalling over Luzon. Then at 4:47 p.m. local time on September 22nd, the ECMWF model updated. The storm track didn't curve north, it didn't stall. It bent west-southwest, a path that would take the eye wall directly over Metro Manila, a megacity of 14 million people, roughly 36 hours from the update time. This wasn't just unexpected, it was the scenario that every disaster planner in the Philippines has privately feared since Haiyan but never seriously planned for, because the odds seemed too remote. Manila sits at the head of a massive bay. During a typhoon, the wind pushes ocean water into that bay like pouring liquid into a funnel. The shape of the coastline amplifies the surge. Storm surge models for a Category 5 direct hit on Manila estimate water levels could reach 18 feet in some districts. 18 feet of seawater in a city where 1.2 million people live in informal settlements built on reclaimed land barely above sea level. Dr. Sutherland's reaction, caught on a Zoom call with disaster coordinators that was later leaked, was 8 seconds of silence followed by, "Oh my God, we need to move people now." The expectation among many in the government was that the storm would weaken before landfall, that the cooler waters closer to shore or increased wind shear would knock it down to Category 3, maybe Category 2. Still dangerous, but survivable with the infrastructure they'd built since Haiyan. That is not what happened. Sea surface temperatures along Fanphone's new projected track were reading 30.8 degrees Celsius. Wind shear was under 10 knots, essentially zero. when every environmental condition the storm needed to maintain intensity was present all the way to the coastline. Think about what that means for a second. If a Category 5 typhoon makes direct landfall on Metro Manila, then every calculation about evacuation capacity, shelter availability, and post-storm recovery becomes irrelevant. You're not managing a disaster. You're managing the collapse of a city. The storm surge alone would inundate Tondo, Navotas, and Malabon, districts with a combined population over 1 million. The wind would destroy most residential structures built before 2010, which is roughly 60% of the city's housing stock. The rainfall would trigger landslides in the informal settlements built into hillsides around the metro area. You're not just adjusting emergency plans. You're looking at a casualty count that could exceed Haiyan by an order of magnitude. Metro Manila has 12 major hospitals. Storm surge modeling shows that 7 of them would flood. The city has 1 international airport. It sits 15 feet above sea level. The main seaport, which handles 70% of the country's imports, would be destroyed. Every supply chain that keeps 14 million people fed and supplied runs through infrastructure that would be offline for weeks, possibly months. The economic damage estimates start at $85 billion and climb from there depending on how long the power grid stays down. For context, that's roughly 18% of the entire Philippine GDP. The question is no longer whether Manila can handle a Category 5 typhoon. The question is whether the country can function without Manila if the storm destroys it. Maria Santos carried her entire life in a plastic bag as she boarded an evacuation bus in Quezon City at 11 p.m. on September 22nd. She's 34. She works as a domestic helper. She has 2 daughters, ages 6 and 9, who were sleeping when the barangay captain knocked on her door and told her the mandatory evacuation order had been issued. 20 minutes to pack. Buses leaving in an hour. Her apartment is on the 3rd floor of a building constructed in 1987. It has survived every typhoon that's hit Manila in her lifetime, including Typhoon Ketsana in 2009, which put her entire neighborhood under 6 feet of water. She told a Reuters reporter at the evacuation center, "I don't understand why this time is different. The building is strong. We always stay." The reporter didn't have a good answer because the truth, that a Category 5 typhoon produces wind forces 40% stronger than anything her building was designed to withstand, is not something you can explain in a way that makes someone leave their home in the middle of the night. Across Metro Manila, 2.4 million people received the same evacuation order between 6 p.m. and midnight on September 22nd. As of 6 a.m. on September 23rd, roughly 900,000 had complied. That left 1.5 million people still in the projected surge zone. Governor Reynaldo Ramirez of Rizal Province, which borders Metro Manila to the east, held a press conference at 7 a.m. local time. His voice was steady, but the text of what he said was devastating in its simplicity. If you are in an evacuation zone and you choose to stay, write your name and your next of kin's contact information on your arm in permanent marker. It will help us identify you after the storm. He wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. Storm surges don't leave bodies intact. They scatter them across miles of debris. The evacuation is not the only problem. Fanphone's projected rainfall, now estimated at 35 to 50 inches across the northern Philippines, will trigger flooding in river systems that drain into areas hundreds of miles from the storm's center. The Cagayan River, the longest river in the Philippines, already exceeded flood stage on September 21st due to monsoon rainfall. The additional input from Fanphone could push water levels to a record crest, higher than the catastrophic floods of 2020 that displaced 400,000 people, and that's assuming the Magat Dam holds. Now, Magat is an earthen dam on the Cagayan River system. It was built in 1982 and designed to handle a 1 in 100-year flood. The inflow from Fanphone's rainfall is projected to be a 1 in 500-year event. If the dam operators open the spillways to prevent overtopping, they flood 50,000 people downstream. If they don't, and the dam fails, they flood 250,000. The National Irrigation Administration issued a statement at 8 a.m. on September 23rd that managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. Magat Dam is structurally sound and continuously monitored. Controlled releases will be implemented as necessary to maintain safe reservoir levels. Translation: we're about to flood you on purpose because the alternative is worse. At 2:14 p.m. local time on September 23rd, Typhoon Fanphone's eye crossed the coast of Aurora Province. On the wind gauge at Bel Air Observatory recorded sustained winds of 184 miles per hour before the instrument failed. The pressure reading at the time of landfall was 887 millibars, the 3rd lowest pressure ever recorded in a landfalling tropical cyclone. The eye wall, the ring of most intense winds surrounding the eye, was 25 miles wide. It took 47 minutes to pass over the town of Casiguran. During those 47 minutes, wind forces equivalent to an EF4 tornado stripped every piece of sheet metal, every roof tile, and every loose object from the town and flung it inland at over 100 miles per hour. The storm surge arrived 12 minutes before the eye. Residents who had sheltered in 2-story concrete buildings watched the ocean rise 14 feet in less than 10 minutes, swallowing the ground floor and everything in it. Though a priest named Father Ramon Dimayuga broadcast over a battery-powered radio from the bell tower of Casiguran Church. The water is at the second-floor windows. We are 40 people in the tower. We cannot leave. If you can hear this, we are in the tower. The transmission cut off at 2:28 p.m. The tower did not collapse. All 40 people survived. But the church itself, a Spanish colonial structure that had stood since 1753, was reduced to rubble. No communication came out of Casiguran for 16 hours after landfall. When the first aerial reconnaissance flights reached Aurora Province on the morning of September 24th, the footage they transmitted looked like the aftermath of an airstrike. Entire coastal villages were gone. Not damaged, gone. Foundations swept clean. The only structures still standing were reinforced concrete buildings above 3 stories tall, and even those had lost their facades, windows, and roofs. The town of Dingalan, population 24,000, was 80% destroyed. The storm surge had reached 16 feet, overtopping the seawall and carrying fishing boats 3 miles inland. In Metro Manila, the scenario that everyone feared didn't fully materialize. The storm had weakened slightly, down to 165 miles per hour sustained winds, by the time the eye wall reached the metro area. And the angle of approach meant the worst of the storm surge hit the less populated eastern coast rather than the densely packed bayside districts. But didn't fully materialize is a relative term when you're talking about 800,000 people losing power, 120,000 homes damaged, and storm surge flooding that put seawater into neighborhoods that had never flooded in recorded history. The Pasig River, which runs through the heart of Manila, reversed flow as the storm surge pushed ocean water inland. Water levels in the river rose 11 feet above normal in under 2 hours. Districts along the riverbank, Mandaluyong, Sanshane, Makati, experienced flooding that wasn't in any model because the models didn't account for a river flowing backward. Maria Santos's apartment building survived. The 3rd floor where her family lived stayed dry, but the first 2 floors were destroyed and the building was condemned. She and her daughters are currently in an evacuation center with no clear timeline for when they can return. As of September 28th, 5 days after landfall, the official death toll stands at 247, with over 1,100 missing. Those numbers will climb, they always do. Bodies are still being found in collapsed structures and debris fields. But here's the thing that's keeping meteorologists awake. Fanphone wasn't an outlier. It was a preview. Sea surface temperatures in the western Pacific have increased 0.8 degrees Celsius in the last 30 years. That's not a projection, that's measured data. And every 1/10 of a degree increase in ocean temperature adds roughly 5% more moisture to the atmosphere and 3 to 4% more energy to tropical cyclones. Dr. Carrie Emanuel, a climate scientist at MIT who has spent 4 decades studying hurricane physics, published a paper in Nature in August 2025, 1 month before Fanphone formed, that projected a 45% increase in Category 5 typhoons in the western Pacific by 2050. Not total typhoons, Category 5 typhoons specifically. Ipa Fanphone is storm number 3 in that trend line. The infrastructure that the Philippines built after Haiyan was designed to handle storms like Haiyan. It was not designed to handle something 15% stronger hitting every 3 years. No country's infrastructure is. We're living inside a question that no one wants to ask out loud. The most sophisticated weather prediction system in human history told us exactly where Fanphone would go, how strong it would be, and what it would do. The models were right. The warnings were issued. The evacuations were ordered. And 247 people still died. Something in the gap between knowing a disaster is coming and actually preventing it, in those 48 hours between forecast and landfall that we've spent a century refining, is still killing people we should be able to save. Meteorology has been here before. In 1900, a hurricane killed 8,000 people in Galveston, Texas, because the forecast said it would miss. In 2005, Katrina killed 1,800 because the levees failed. In 2013, Haiyan killed 6,300 because people didn't understand what storm surge meant. Each time, we learned. We built better models, better warnings, better infrastructure. And each time, the storms got stronger faster than our defenses could keep up. Fanphone is forcing a question that goes beyond meteorology. At what wind speed does a typhoon become unsurvivable regardless of preparation? Category 5 is the highest category on the Saffir-Simpson scale. It tops out at 157 miles per hour. Everything above that, 165, 185, 195 miles per hour, is still just Category 5, because when the scale was created in 1971, and if storms stronger than that were considered so rare they weren't worth defining separately, Fanphone made landfall at 184 miles per hour. There's no Category 6, but maybe there should be. The Philippine government is already rebuilding Casiguran, Dingalan, and the other coastal towns that were erased. They'll be stronger this time. More concrete, higher elevation, better drainage, and in 3 years, or 5, or 7, another typhoon will form in the western Pacific with sea surface temperatures half a degree warmer than today. And it will test whether stronger was enough. The question isn't whether we can predict these storms. We can. We just proved it. The question is whether we can survive them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.